Childhood Trauma webinar. This webinar is co-hosted by the Institute for Educational Leadership and the Center for the Study of Social Policy. This is Jennifer Masutani from the Coalition for Community Schools at the Institute for Educational Leadership, and I'm here with my colleagues from the Family and Community Engagement team at IEL. We'd like to thank CSSP for co-hosting this webinar with us and thank all of our presenters. We have Cailin O'Connor, Senior Associate from CSSP, Cyntoria Grant, Parent University Director from Boston Public Schools, Mona Lisa Smith, President and CEO of Mothers for Justice and Equality, Donna Thompson-Bennett, Co-Director of the National Parent Leadership Institute, and Maureen O'Neill Davis, Parent Leadership Training Institute graduate and Connecticut parent leader. At any point during today's webinar, feel free to type in your questions in the questions box. We'll be monitoring it and saving questions for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing this webinar recording in the next couple of days. If you want to download the slides now, you can download them in the handout box. We'll start off with Cailin, who will be speaking about why family engagement is important to responding to toxic stress. Leah and Mona Lisa will talk about building partnerships to address trauma, and then Donna and Maureen will discuss how to engage parents and the impact of parent leadership. We'll conclude with a Q&A session at the end. And with that, I'll leave it to Cailin to start us off.
Thanks, Jen. We are getting a lot of background noise from somewhere. So if all the panelists can mute your line, I think that will help everyone be able to hear better.
Muted.
I have just muted everyone except myself. So we will deal with that issue and unmute everyone in a minute. But for now, I want to get started by talking about why family engagement matters when we're talking about toxic stress and trauma. I think the most fundamental reason is one that we all know, but that sometimes gets forgotten in our thinking about toxic stress, which is that children don't grow up in programs and they don't grow up in schools. They grow up in families and communities. And so when we want to really make a difference for kids, we need to be engaging their families. We need to be looking at what's going on in their communities to make both their homes and their communities the most nurturing and supportive places they can be. And family engagement is one way that for a school person or a teacher or a program director or service provider who wants to help a kid, reaching out to the family is a way to do that in a very effective, longer-term thinking way. So what I've put up here to start with is our definition of toxic stress. Many of the experiences that we consider trauma would fit either under the heading of tolerable stress or toxic stress. And if you look at those definitions, the difference is really about the presence of a caring adult and the role that an adult can play in buffering children from the negative effects of an adversity or a difficult experience. So we're not talking about those smaller positive stress that's described on the first box, but when we get into the more emotionally costly, challenging things that everyone experiences in their lives, for children, the difference between whether that ends up triggering a toxic stress response or not is often about the presence of a nurturing and buffering adult. So if we want to prevent toxic stress and we want to make it less likely that adversity will lead to that response, engaging the parents and the other adults who are the closest around the child is one way to do that, and a very critical one. So at the Center for the Study of Social Policy, where I work, or CSSP, we have been interested for a while in shifting the conversation about toxic stress and trauma. We're very happy to see the growing understanding of trauma and toxic stress and increased interest in doing something about them because we have more and more understanding about their potential effects on children and families. But we feel like the conversation is often a little too limited. It often seems to be focused on individuals, and it's about isolated traumatic experiences and about how we respond to an individual child who has experienced trauma. That's all good. All of that needs to happen. But we need to also recognize that trauma happens at the community level. We have, we have entire communities that are dealing with trauma and that are more or less resilient in how everyone within those communities experiences them and relates to each other. We can't always focus on the family as the source of the toxic stress, when often the family is the one thing that is buffering a child from potentially toxic effects of other things around them. So we need to focus more on the root causes of toxic stress, what is happening in some communities that families are having to protect their children from, what's happening in some families that children need more support from and that parents need support to navigate through. How can we build protective factors that will help families and communities be stronger while also being aware of the needs of people who have already experienced trauma? So we really wanted to get into talking about those larger community issues. And we have a network called the Early Childhood Learning and Innovation Network for Communities, where we're convening these 10 communities around the country that are doing really great early childhood system building work. And they had told us that toxic stress was one of the biggest concerns, one of the issues that they were really grappling with and figuring out their response to. So we convened what we call a learning lab with 6 of those communities who really wanted to dig in and talk about it. And as we talked with them, a lot of it was sort of, our early conversations were about, who's doing the best research on toxic stress, who are the best speakers about it, what are the latest scientific findings about toxic stress. And that was all very interesting and important. But then we came to a point of realizing that the people we had convened might not be the experts in the neuroscience behind toxic stress, but they were the experts in what's happening in their communities to try to prevent it from happening in the first place and to respond when it does happen. And so we ended up developing this issue brief that you see on the screen and that you can download either in the handouts here within the webinar, or you can go to our website and check it out later, which we call Working Toward Well-Being, Community Approaches to Toxic Stress. So really putting the toxic stress work under the umbrella of larger efforts to improve family and community and child well-being. At the heart of that issue brief is what we call a framework of community approaches to toxic stress. And I could spend a whole hour going through this framework. I have actually done that before. If you'd like to go to our website, you can find recorded webinars about this. But for today, I just want to give you a really high-level overview of it and then zoom in on one part in particular. So what we did was talk about certain groups that we call agents for change within a community system. We talk about parents and caregivers, we talk about providers, and then we talk about the sort of leaders and decision makers at the community level. And what each of those groups can do to create a community context in which individuals and families will have more positive experiences, have more protective factors, and have less exposure to stressful, potentially toxic stress situations. And then how children and adults will receive the kind of support they need if they have experienced toxic stress. And that leads to the outcomes that we're all interested in. So what you'll notice here is that this includes everything from prevention to response. It encompasses interventions that were going on before anybody ever used the term toxic stress, but that were designed to prevent child abuse and neglect, or to prevent, to promote positive health outcomes. All of these things come together toward promoting well-being in a way that toxic stress, the whole conversation about toxic stress can inform that work, but doesn't fundamentally change some of the things that were already going on in communities, yet gives us a lens to think about it all fitting together. So as I said, I wanted to zoom in today on what we talk about when we say that parents and caregivers can be agents for change within a community system. So we feel like we put them first on this list, and that was very intentional because we feel that the parents and caregivers are often overlooked players in this whole conversation. Unfortunately, I think there is some blaming of parents that goes on when we talk about kids coming to school or into other programs having experienced trauma. The parents might not be the first person that you think of wanting to engage with, but often we know that the parents themselves have experienced the same trauma that the children have, or some of the parents were bystanders to the trauma that their children experienced, which has also affected them as parents and caregivers. And some of the parents and caregivers we're working with, as you're going to hear from other presenters later, are caring for children who experience trauma, and they're struggling just as much to figure out how best to meet that child's needs, whether that's a foster care, kinship care, an adoptive parent, or whatever the case may be. So parents and caregivers really need to be engaged in this work, and there's a lot that we can do. You're going to hear from great speakers on the rest of this webinar about things they can do. One thing that a lot of systems that serve children and families and programs that serve children and families use is our Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework. These are 5 research-based and intuitive characteristics that we know make families more likely to thrive. They make optimal child development more likely and make child abuse and neglect less likely. And we've developed some resources which you can find on our website. There's some links later on, which will show you how different types of programs are using these protective factors as a way to approach how we work with parents. There are everyday actions we can take in our interactions with families that can help them strengthen these protective factors. And I hope that you'll find that useful. We have specific tools about how parents can use support in each of these protective factors when they are caring for a child that's experienced trauma, and other materials that might be relevant for the type of work that you do. So as I said, we have a lot of resources that you are welcome to check out on our website, strengtheningfamilies.net or cssp.org. Both will get you to the same place. And with that, I'm going to hand off to our next presenters, Cyntoria Grant and Mona Lisa Smith from Boston, who are going to share some of their great experiences. So I'm unmuting them now.
Thank
Cyntoria
you. Hello.
Lisa. Hello.
Hi. Hi. Can you hear us?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, awesome. So this is Cyntoria, and thank you for having us on this webinar today. We wanted to talk a little bit about partnerships. We know that our previous speaker did a great job in just outlining what some of the needs are, what does trauma look like. And in Boston, our landscape of Boston took a turn with an increased amount of violence happening, and including our students. And so they're coming to school grieving and traumatized as they've lost their friends or family members, and then we're expecting them to learn. We have an example of one school who lost 4 students in 1 year, and so that school was really like just on this continuum of trauma, and so working with the principal, thinking about what we could do to really support these schools and our students and families with all of these outside homicide activities that are going on that certainly affect our children. And then last year, at the end of our school year, unfortunately, we lost a student right outside of our school in the middle of the school day to a homicide too, which was really just traumatizing. And for us, for Parent University, we've done some work with trauma, but not as intense as what needed to happen right now in terms of with our schools to figure out how do we support our families, how do we support our students with the trauma that is going on. And we knew there was a need in the district. We knew our families were calling us and asking us for help and support. We received some grant money to be able to support families around trauma. And so we reached out to some community partners to build partnerships to really support us in this work as we're supporting families. And so we reached out to Mothers for Justice and Equality and Mona Lisa's team to really see what they were doing among other folks. And what we loved about their program is that they were doing this peer-to-peer model where mothers who had been traumatized, after receiving help and getting help, they were able to kind of give back to other families who were dealing with trauma, and together they were growing and healing together. And we said that that's what we want. We want something that really supports families, not only for one time or 2 times, but really something that helps for a long time. And so I'm going to bring Mona Lisa in so that she can talk about the program, and then we'll talk about some work we did over the summer of last year.
Thank you, Cyntoria. So as Cyntoria had mentioned, that the organization that I represent is called Mothers for Justice and Equality, and we are a grassroots civic leadership organization that was founded by women who had lost children to violence. So our work is really about ending violence, and in doing so, we seek partners like Boston Public Schools, Boston Police, who embrace the same mission as we do in ending the violence. So the partnership with Boston Public Schools was very important to us in every aspect. We identified the problem as a problem where, you know, in small communities such as sections of Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and across our country, and I'm sure many of you will agree that the violence is concentrated in those communities. And many of the families who attend Boston Public Schools and other communities, they, you know, they are dealing with trauma that is going untreated. And so as, you know, as the speaker before, Cyntoria and I had talked about, you know, those toxic stresses really do affect, you know, the family's ability to be engaged in the schools, and also the students' ability to really begin to improve in their academic scores. So our model really was about education engagement, and that's what really attracted Boston Public Schools to us, that we were really about taking their parents, the parents in the schools, many of them had already been members of Mothers for Justice and Equality, and educating them on how to really unpack a lot of the trauma and stress that they were dealing with, and begin to rebuild that into positive energy where they could put that into being more involved in their schools, more involved in activities with their children, and more involved in civic leadership in their communities. And that's really the engagement piece that we worked on. You know, we truly believe that mothers and youth working together with civic leaders, with our local schools, with law enforcement, are the key to ending the violence that's really causing us not to be as successful in education and other areas. So, you know, just to give you a sense of our engagement approach, how women and youth, we operate in 2 public schools, you know, approach this is taking our personal leadership training, leaving with a vision and an action plan of how they can be engaged, becoming more involved in our service learning core, which is really about workforce readiness, and continuing their education and involvement in their community and in their schools. You know, so
and so we want to talk briefly before we go into impact, to talk about the work that we did over the summer of last year. And so working with families from some of our high schools, our mothers, we had a 8-week program that happened over the summer where parents had an opportunity, one, to spend a couple of weeks just building relationship and a strong community among the parents and the peers and Mona Lisa's leadership team, and then to really go deep about what the trauma is, what are their issues, finding out that their issues really look different. So some may have lost a child, someone else might have lost a parent or lost their home. And so with all of these different areas of trauma, the program, the peer-to-peer program, really helped them to identify the trauma and then begin to work on their healing process and what they envision for themselves for the future, and really digging deeper in that work. And so we did that last year over the summer, and we continue to do some of that same work with other schools in Boston Public Schools. I'm going to turn it really quickly back over to Mona Lisa, who will talk about the impact that has happened in the programs that she's done in connection with BPS and her other work.
And so you could see that we've touched over 200 individuals. Individuals have gained an understanding of trauma. You know, we've increased participation in their ability to, you know, educate and be advocates in their community, and we've employed a number of youth. And our work has been so successful that we have been invited to come into the House of Correction and begin to work with young men and women who are, you know, seeking their GEDs and continuing their education on really building these sustainable life plans. And in the model, our youth, we have touched a number of youth. And as Cyntoria had mentioned, we work in the schools. And it's a real peer-to-peer model that has been adopted by the Office of Victim Assistance and the Boston Public Health Commission as well. And our work, we hold conferences where we fly women in from across the country who are working in their communities, and we do a train-the-trainer model where they can begin to learn how to use these skills themselves.
So we want to, as we continue to talk about the work that we're doing with families, I want to introduce Donna Thompson-Bennett from the National Parent Leadership Institute, who will talk further about what they're doing to really support families in this role as parent leaders and in the work of trauma. Donna?
Our primary presenter for the National Parent Leadership Institute via our Parent Leadership Training Institute, Maureen O'Neill Davis. To give you some context, the National Parent Leadership Institute exists to coordinate and increase the civic skills and impact of diverse parents to improve child and community outcomes as they build caring communities. Particularly, we often build these caring communities and work with community partners and parents in the midst of tragedy and trauma, and we're there in the aftermath as well. Parents are seeking to address it in a variety of ways throughout our different sites in the states, but this afternoon we're going to be joined by one parent in particular from Connecticut who will share her story. We began as a national replication arm of the Connecticut Parent Leadership Training Institute, which was designed by the Commission on Children in 1992. And this design was based on listening to parents. It was born out of engaging parents in a conversation about an issue that mattered for children. So what PLTI does is it facilitates parents who wish to improve the lifelong health, safety, and learning of children on how to become practice change agents for the next generation. Cailin earlier was talking about agents of change. The whole goal of the National Parent Leadership Institute and PLTI is to engage parents, leaders, meeting them as leaders, but actually encouraging, tapping into their power to be just that, agents of change. Since our beginning, though, we've been developing the field of parent leadership. And the way we do it, excuse me, is by embracing a cross-race, cross-class, parent-informed, and pro-social learning approach to building parents as a constituency for community and recognizing children as the beneficiaries. Earlier it was talked about how parents often were the last ones or the first ones to blame, but the last ones to engage in the process of making a positive difference, an impactful change, and yielding positive outcomes for their children and community. MPLI believes and starts with parents at the beginning because we know that they are the actual source of beginning to make some sustainable and lifelong changes on behalf of children in community. We also believe in the power of community partnership as been outlined by Cyntoria and Mona Lisa if you're going to address the issues of trauma that impact our children. Our partners include agencies as well as state and local governments, but our core work is in the area of parent leadership, and we do this across the nation. Our core work is to actually work with parents who care as they become parents who lead. This afternoon, we are fortunate that we have one of our parents out of Connecticut, which is our foundation state, to share her story of not only caring, but actually becoming a champion advocate and change agent on behalf of her family and addressing childhood trauma. Maureen O'Neill Davis is a PLTI alumni from West Hartford, graduating in 2014. She is a Connecticut legislative advocate for Attachment and Trauma Network and a founding member of Family Forward Advocacy Connecticut. Her PLTI project called Child Heal to Thrive has become her life's work. It is my honor to introduce Maureen O'Neill Davis, Connecticut Parent Leader.
Thank you very much, Donna. Good afternoon. My name is Maureen O'Neill Davis. I'm going to talk about PLTI and how it opened up doors for me to become a parent who leads. I lead through advocacy, through the bonding of parents and ideas, and through connecting parents and systems to inform change around addressing childhood trauma. And my slide is not moving.
There you go. Now you're flying.
Okay. Hold on one second. Can we go back? Sorry about that. I'm a married mom of 3 kids. They're very active and very talented. Together, my family started in South Florida. In 2005, when our son was 9 months old, my husband's sister was murdered via domestic violence. Our nieces witnessed that event. Both presented with PTSD and trauma behaviors. It took years, but our oldest daughter finally responded to therapy, but our youngest daughter's symptoms were illogical and hard to manage. Her reactive attachment and post-traumatic stress disorders were quite puzzling. By the age of 6, her symptoms and behaviors became much less manageable. Our home became chaotic, unpredictable, and periodically unsafe. My daughter's fight, flight, freeze behaviors can be exhausting. If I can get us to that panel, you'll be able to see. There we go. These are some pictures of her illustrating her typical faces, which coincide with aggressive antisocial behaviors. Her faces and behaviors were, and continue to be, challenging for us and her as they're hard to manage. She's been suicidal for years, as she really would like to be with her deceased mother, which is very challenging. The Disney Pixar film Inside Out did an amazing job at animating a child's emotional crisis stemming from trauma. Like the little girl in the movie, my daughter lost joy. Her toxic stress, which stems from agonizing sadness, visceral fear, and immense shame, informs who she is, how she thinks, and how she acts and interacts with others. Her instinct to protect herself can at times put members of our family at risk through her actions as well as the tales that she tells. She's been inpatient many times, and we've engaged outpatient and in-home therapeutic services and therapies for many years. Benefit has been minimal, though, and short-lived. From the time the girls came to us, I researched, and I was on a mission to really understand my daughter's behaviors and her emotional and developmental delays. We engaged services to inform healing and keep everyone safe, but it was very challenging. I wanted to get her the help that she needed early when I thought it could do the most good. I learned through the Cleveland Clinic research, which suggests that adverse childhood experiences can lead to brain function abnormalities similar to that caused by physical head trauma, and I found data indicating that as many as 74% of adult inmates in U.S. prisons today spent time in foster care and were adopted. So this was motivating to me. Cailin O'Connor touched on causes of toxic stress earlier, including poverty. Many folks believe childhood trauma is caused by abuse or neglect, but other experiences can lead to serious complicated trauma symptoms too, such as the loss of a parent through adoption, divorce, or death, community or intimate environmental violence, or prolonged infant-toddler hospitalization. Not having one's needs consistently met during early brain development can lead to lifelong impairments. In Connecticut, we are one of 5 states that administers its children's behavioral health system under the umbrella of its Child Protection Agency. This fact has proven detrimental for many families, including my own. We are directed to its voluntary services program to access higher level care, with most parents being instructed or led to believe that if they give up their child to the state, that's how the child will gain access to higher level care. When parents choose not to do that, many find themselves subject to child protection cases with custody transfer occurring through court order. Both voluntary and involuntary custody transfer of a traumatized child compounds the attachment disruption and trauma-rooted conditions, erodes any built trust, and severs delicate connections. Neither adopted forever families nor biological parents are spared. When parents are viewed like this as a cause, they lose the ability to effectively advocate for their child. When I found PLTI, I found purpose. Our family lost our severely traumatized daughter for 2 years at a time when specialized treatment could have done her the most good. During that time is when I enrolled in a PLTI class. The instruction showed me how to regain my critical thinking skills, rise above the anguish and despair, and explore cultural differences to inform a plan. I knew I had to leverage my personal experience to benefit others. I knew what was happening to my family was actually knowledge. PLTI gave me the confidence and reinforced my coalition building skills, and through the community project task, I crafted an advocacy roadmap to change. I am now the glue within my family system again. I fill a missing link within circles of child-serving systems. I've become a community organizer for parents, and as I network through various stakeholder environments, my mission has become more clear. Parent voice around childhood trauma is missing, and at government system tables where parent engagement is required, it's really just a checkbox. I concluded the real value will only occur through credible, organized parent voice in strategic locales throughout systems, from education to insurance and from child welfare to legislative systems. Because of PLTI, I am a parent leader leading a community through mentoring and by motivating those with common experiences to find their voice. I bring together advocates, parents, and attorneys who represent families harmed by practices that claim to aid families raising children with trauma histories. I reach out to condition proficient providers to compel them to lend their voice to our change movement. I apply intelligence in my delivery of information while tempering my emotional self. I am a change agent. PLTI parent leaders like me can change at every level, can make change at every level. Because of PLTI, my one voice and my strengths, coupled with the diverse and valuable skills of others, is powerful. That's leadership. Parent voices are informing systems changed in addressing childhood trauma right now because of PLTI. We're informing systems growth, new payment methods, and collection of data. We're bringing parents out of the shadows, exposing questionable child protection practices, behavioral health care delivery chains, and changing laws. This is collective parent voice at work. It all began with a community project. Thank you. The cover of that project is pictured here, entitled Child Heal to Thrive. It became my roadmap to addressing Connecticut's broken children's behavioral health delivery system of care. It was complex trauma and post-adoption specific, and in it I set forth a 3-phase framework to change the system that harmed my family and others, and I networked. Now, together with my advocacy team, I explore vehicles to increase awareness, educate the public, and inform lawmakers, all to trigger reaction and change outcomes. Connecticut Health Investigative Team has done several investigative stories on the work that we're doing within our advocacy group and around our efforts. They can be found at chit.org. And really, PLTI helped bring all this together. I'm also a volunteer legislative advocate for the Attachment and Trauma Network. ATN's mission is to promote healing of families through support, education, and advocacy. You can find them at attachtrauma.org. And in my role as an advocate and organizer of the Family Forward entities, I wear a lot of hats. So right now, the Family Forward Advocacy Connecticut group is pushing custody for care reform legislation. This legislation is focused on eliminating voluntary and involuntary custody transfer of children with specialized needs, specifically trauma histories, to the Department of Children and Families as a means to access intensive child psychiatric care and treatment. With custody transfer goes decision-making authority over the child, and trust inroads are often lost. On March 9th, House Bill 6297, an act concerning voluntary admission to DCF, was unanimously voted through and out of the Children's Committee as a task force. Next, it will move on to the House floor for a vote, and so we're working on that advocacy and promotion right now. So to conclude, PLTI trains parents who care to lead around addressing childhood trauma by informing systems change. It's a springboard that gives parents who care the courage to take on big projects and to lead civic engagement. I'm pictured here with fellow PLTI alumni and Connecticut lawmaker Representative Kathy Abercrombie receiving my PLTI certificate in 2014. The second picture is of myself and my daughter on a very good day. I've also added a photograph here of myself with a group of moms and grandma warriors supporting foster care finance reform in Washington, D.C. in February of last year. Myself and another Connecticut advocate joined advocates from all across the country in support of the Family First Prevention Services Act. This was the first legislation in 20 years to take on foster care finance reform. This is a very important bill as it addresses unintended consequences created under the Adoption and Safe Families Act of '97. And those unintended consequences do inform how child protection agencies utilize funding to aid children and families while children remain in the custody of their parents. I thank you very much, and I'd just like to conclude by saying PLTI, it's about empowering parent action to build meaningful change, and we're doing this around addressing childhood trauma right now. Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're having some problems unmuting Jennifer, who's speaking now. I'm unmuting others. Jennifer, can you speak? Can you unmute yourself? I'm going to go ahead, since I believe people can hear me, and check on the questions that have come in so far. We did hear several people, or get comments from several people thanking the presenters. I haven't seen any questions yet, so please do type in questions if you have any. I do see a question that has come in now, so I'll read this and I hope that some of our panelists can respond. The study says, the question says, a recent study found that children of incarcerated parents are more likely to drop out of school, develop learning disabilities, misbehave in school, suffer from migraines, asthma, high cholesterol, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and homelessness. In your experience, how much are schools aware of this form of trauma? And do any of our panelists want to respond to how aware schools are of the risks that children face when their parents are incarcerated?
I'm not necessarily an expert on this this particular question. However, I know for Boston Public Schools, we have counselors in the schools that really support students if they know what's going on in the home, that they really do try to put supports in place to support students, whether it's in-house counseling, whether it's referred to something outside as a way to support. Many times the students kind of have a conversation with the teachers about what's going on at home because they trust them, and so they're usually the first point of contact that offers support to the other parent on how we can support the child right in the school, as well as talking to the school nurse and counselors.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to jump in with thoughts about how schools relate to children of incarcerated parents? So we have one particular, a very specific question here from Maureen, asking if you could repeat the information you referenced about infant-toddler hospitalization.
Certainly. A lot of times when we talk about the causes of trauma, we tend to focus mostly on the abuse, neglect, poverty features which occur specifically to a child in the immediate environment. But there are studies that support that children who are born with medical conditions, who experience extended periods of time in the hospital, children who are born premature, who are in the hospital for a long period of time while their mother goes home, especially in cases of multiple births, that these children tend to present later in life with many of the symptoms that are typically associated with trauma history. And I know that there's additional research being done about that now, and I believe the Mayo Clinic may be one of those entities looking into that research. But how those patterns of behavior present varies in severity with all kids, and certainly the amount of parent engagement will minimize the severity of those symptoms over time.
Thank you, Maureen. And we're getting a lot of background noise again. I think that may mean we were successful at unmuting someone who was previously muted. I did want to say that the person who asked that question did type in again whether you could cite the studies you were talking about. I wonder if you might be able to type something into the chat box with the authors, or if you don't have that information at your fingertips, maybe we can follow up with Susan on that.
I don't have that information right at my fingertips, but I can provide that to you, and we can get that out to somebody.
Great, yeah, if you share that with Jen and Natalie, they'll be able to send it back to the person who asked. And Natalie, can I check whether you're able to speak now? Okay, we're getting a lot of background noise, but still not able to hear our moderator. So we have another question, which is let me find where it was typed in. What do you do if there's a lack of parent voice in your school? What would any of our speakers recommend to do as a place to start?
This is Donna. I would recommend that you find maybe one parent leader and find out why other parents may not be engaged. It might be something as simple as the time that you've been inviting parent leaders to be engaged doesn't work for their life schedule. There is no one-size-fits-all model in engaging parent leaders, but the one thing that we always say in MPLI and PLTI is you meet parents where they are, and in order to meet them where they are, you have to know where they are. And so sometimes it means you have to go outside of the school building and into that community where parents live to find out where their time is spent and how they are engaged. Also discovering what their schedule of life is in terms of whether it's work within as well as outside of the home that might make it challenging for them to maybe operate within the school day schedule. And so just being creative. It might mean something on an evening. All PLTI classes are usually done one night out of the week or sometimes on a Saturday morning. And so you want to find out when and how is the best way to meet parents and to engage them, because the one thing that we've discovered, even when parents are absent, their absence does not necessarily mean that they don't care.
Thank you so much. I think that's so critical. And I'm wondering, Jose, who asked the question, did not say this specifically, but that your answer was great about sort of getting to the parents. What about if there's resistance in the building and the leadership in the school to engaging families? Do you have any advice for that?
I think it's the same thing. You have to figure out why. Why is there resistance to partnership? Because ultimately, if we all agree, if the educators, whether they are the administrators or the teachers on the front line in the classroom, or if it's any other staff that's a part of that school system or school building, if they want the best outcomes for their students, for their learners, they have to understand that those students come with parents. Those parents are part of the partnership, and they could actually help those educators achieve what they ultimately see as the goals for those students. And it needs to be done in partnership with the children as well, with the students as partners in the conversation, but particularly you can't do it in a vacuum. And if they don't believe it, they probably already are wondering, well, why aren't we getting certain results? And how could we change that? And we believe at NPLI that one of the ways you change is you engage parents in the conversation, in the solution process, not just in saying there's a problem, but how do we begin to address this problem?
Thank you, Donna. The next question that someone typed in is, what are a few best practices for leading families to supportive resources?
I think at least one or two that come to my mind is to make the resources available for them. Having information, community resource fairs where parents can go and talk to several different agencies at the same time, where they don't have to really self-identify and go to the school and say, I need this specifically or that, but all of the resources are there and they're able to have those conversations with the different agencies. And then another idea is to have a parent place or parent center or parent room or parent bulletin board in the school where you can house that kind of information and parents can check the boards. Have a newsletter where you can put different resources in it every day so that parents are able to access it, because they're not always able to go to different places to find it. Sometimes they don't know where those places are, but the more we bring the information and resources to them, the better supported they'll feel.
Excellent. Did anyone else want to jump in on that question?
I'll jump in a little bit on this. You know, when I first got started doing a lot of this advocacy work, I put myself in places where other families would go to collaborate, to share their experiences around the barriers to get care and treatment for their kids. And through those meetings, through collaboratives, mental health collaboratives, collaboratives around juvenile justice, I found my way to system tables where they really wanted a parent voice at the table. So as that evolved, I found myself at Connecticut Behavioral Health Oversight Council, getting appointed to a citizens review panel, getting involved with a number of meeting structures where there were systems people at those tables as well as parents, all coming together for one purpose, which was to inform change in the greater systems that were responding to child needs. Everybody coming with a different experience and a different agenda and different priorities, but when mixed together, the parent voice can be heard amidst the system voices to begin to move change in a direction, and that was really valuable. And that was true in the educational systems as well.
And I would just echo the same comments that were made, that it's so important to go where those parents are. So partner with churches, partner with some of the community-based organizations, some of the free newspaper publications, but finding just creative vehicles to get the information out there to parents. I mean, one of the things that we have heard in our network, Mothers for Justice and Equality, is that sometimes parents just don't know about the meeting. That we assume that they got the information, we assume that, you know, they get the robocall, but they don't know. So just finding creative ways to get that information out to them and going where they are, I think is critical.
Excellent. Thank you. I see another question here. Says, are there recommendations to support young adults who experienced trauma but didn't get treatment earlier? That question from Barbara Roth. I'll actually jump in on that to start with and then see who else wants to answer. This is Cailin from CSSP. I mentioned our Strengthening Families framework. We actually have a parallel framework called Youth Thrive. That's about protective and promotive factors for young people, ages up to 26. So with that, we're really looking at, similarly, what are the characteristics that young people need, and what can the programs that they interact with do to help them strengthen those protective and promotive factors. So I'd encourage you to check that out. You can go to our website at cssp.org, and it's under our child welfare and system reform work, where it's primarily being used, but it's a universal framework that applies to all young people. And it really helps, it has a lot of content in it about how to help young people deal with the trauma they've experienced. And I also think in your question, you may be getting at some parents who themselves have experienced trauma. And when we're doing trauma-informed care for the kids at school, that may not be helping the parent, right? So I think there is a lot of thinking that needs to be done about that. I think I'm not sure how schools can approach that. I know home visiting programs are really good at that for new parents. When you are pregnant or have just brought a baby home, the home visitor can be a big help in helping parents acknowledge and work through some of their own trauma, get further support if they need it, and that can really make a difference in how someone approaches parenting. But I'm not sure once the children are older how a school can play that role. So I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in about young adults, whether they're the parents or students who haven't received treatment for trauma.
So one of the things that, so this is Mona Lisa again from Mothers for Justice and Equality. So we have a youth advocacy program, and it is a youth jobs program. So we actually employ up to 100 youth per year. And what we have done is that we incorporate, trauma, techniques in their role in their job. And so, they do peer-to-peer workshops, they do a number of different activities, and we also partner with the Public Health Commission and others where, where they are having the opportunity to receive, the type of care that they need while doing their normal routine. We also make sure that if there is something that, that surfaces, that our trained youth leaders are able to, identify that, and then we bring the counselors to them, right? So we don't have to send them to a clinical setting or to a place where they're uncomfortable with. We partner with organizations and clinicians that will meet them where they are. And I think that's very important for young people that need the treatment, is that we kind of make sure that we are meeting them where they are and not letting them feel uncomfortable or that they are getting the treatment that they need. And so that's the work that we're doing. We do find that treating youth with trauma is difficult because a lot of times, unlike adults, they don't just come out and show that they're traumatized. Many of them who have lost siblings to violence, and they have to hide their feelings a lot because they're trying to help manage the mother or the parent's feelings, and so a lot of that trauma is hidden. And so creating safe spaces where they can safely unpack that, and then putting them in a place where they can, where the treatment will come to them is very helpful.
Thank you. I noticed that one of the participants, Catherine Cooper, typed in a comment that I think is relevant to this question too. She said, here in Prince George's County Department of Social Services, they've placed 40 community resource coordinators in high-need schools to help students and families close barriers that impede academic success. So that's a really targeted outreach effort. I see another question here. There are so many questions coming in. Thanks everyone for typing those in, and I think some of them will probably have to be responded to in writing after the webinar. So IEL will coordinate that, getting answers to your questions, but we'll deal with a few more while we still have some time here. So the next question is, to what extent are schools, districts, educators in general aware of Strengthening Families framework as a means for engaging vulnerable families? I will say that, so this is Cailin again from CSSP. Most of our Strengthening Families outreach and dissemination work has been in the early childhood field, but the research that backs up that framework applies to families with kids up to 8 years old. So, and really, there's no reason not to apply it to older parents of older children as well as they get older. I don't think those core characteristics change that much, but being true to the research, it is a prenatal through age 8 framework. And so there are places where schools are using it, particularly elementary schools or some places that have used it a lot for the transition to kindergarten. But I'm not aware of as many places that are using it just generally to engage vulnerable families as much as we see that in the early childhood sphere. But I encourage you to contact me if you are looking at doing that. I see a couple more questions I think we could get to. Let's see, here's one. Can you speak about parents who may be of another culture or speak another language? How would they be able to share their voice?
This is Donna. With NPLI and PLTI, we engage parent leaders across race and culture, and we actually have courses that are run in multiple languages, some bilingual courses, some trilingual, and there are monolingual programs in Spanish in certain communities. What we have found is that it is important your first language, if that is your language that you're most comfortable in addressing whatever the issues and concerns you have for your children, you should have access to being able to present in that way. And so what we do when we gather with parent leaders, not only do we make sure that we have the interpretation in order for there to be the exchange, that they're understanding whatever is happening if it's being done in English, but also we do it where their language is translated so they get to speak in their own language, and then it's translated back to those who might not speak the first language of Spanish or Haitian Creole. In that same way, if they wanted to address legislatures, city council, if the system itself did not have in place the translation or interpretation, we would encourage that parent leader to partner with either a community resource, another parent leader who could also be their voice and offer that interpretation. We believe that every voice matters and that every voice should be heard, and the language, no matter what it is in, if it's on behalf of children, can resonate with the common language of care and love and leadership. And so we seek to allow access, and sometimes we have to kind of push in to allow that opportunity to occur.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we may be able to hear Jen now if she wants to step back in here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, just thank you all for your great presentations and for all the questions that came in. I want to thank all our speakers again and CSSP for co-hosting. We have a couple of resource slides if we can get to them. Yes, so I just want to highlight a couple resources. One is that we have IEL is hosting our 4th annual Family and Community Engagement Conference this June in San Francisco, so you can register now. The second is that if you want to continue this discussion on trauma, you are all invited to join a Twitter chat hosted by the Coalition for Community Schools Coordinators Network next month. And the date will be announced soon, but you can follow us using hashtag CSChats. And then if you want to see our first webinar on addressing trauma in community schools, the link to the recording is in the slides, or you can go to www.communityschools.org. And then if we can go to the last slide, we just again want to thank all our speakers and CSSP, and we'll be sharing the slides and the recording with you all within the next couple of days. And then we have a quick evaluation that we ask that you guys take to help us improve webinars in the future. So thank you all again for attending, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.